Abigail, we can escape to the north. There's a place we can be together. Across the border. Will you leave with me?
Uncover the lost chapters of your family history with Ancestry. Get started for free at ancestry.ca.
How's everybody doing? My name is Anthony Brian Logan, and today we got to talk about what you just saw, which was an ad from ancestry.com. There's a lot of controversy around this. People are really upset. They're talking about how could they do this? This is tone deaf, all this, that, and the third. Before I even get into the controversy and why it's a big deal, let me back up a little bit and explain why this ad was even created. As you know, ancestry.com is where you go to try to find some of your distant family, maybe even close family that you don't know, trying to find out your roots, where you originate from. That's what the service is used for. This particular ad was for Canadians, and there are plenty of Canadians that are black who have American slave ancestry. Why do you ask? Well, I'm glad you did ask. During the time of the Underground Railroad, a lot of slaves escaping to the north, some of them went beyond the United States or what is now the United States and went into Canada for safe harbor. And they did so along the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad was not an actual physical thing. It wasn't like a subway system that went from Alabama to Saskatchewan. It wasn't like that. It was a series of homes you were able to find safe harbor, food, clothing, whatever you needed in. Most of these homes were owned by whites. That's the truth. That's the reality. It was not just big cornucopia of black folks that owned houses in the South and in the North for black slaves to find harbor in to go escape to a free state or to Canada. It wasn't like that. It was mostly whites. That's just the truth. Now, we hear about Harriet Tubman and whatnot. She was just one individual. There were a lot of people that were involved with this whole situation, but I digress. There were certain laws in certain states against this whole thing. Ohio was a prime example. Let's go back to the Civil War, 1863. West Virginia at this particular point in time is still part of Virginia, and they are in the Confederacy. At a certain point, they secede from Virginia, the Confederacy, into the Union. They still have their slaves because, as you know, Virginia was a slave state. West Virginia was part of Virginia. They were as well. They had them in Kanawha County, Charleston, and whatnot. Union soldiers came from Ohio into West Virginia and said, hey, we know you guys have slaves, and that's fine. We're not going to try to take them from you. You can keep your slaves. And if they try to escape and they're successful into Ohio, we're going to bring them back to West Virginia because we have laws on the books that preclude us from being able to harbor fugitive slaves. Okay, so that's why you had to have the Underground Railroad, not only in the South, but also in the North, because if you had runaway slaves caught in the North, that was actually a crime. You might get sent to jail, get a fine, and the slaves would be returned back to wherever they came from or just back to the South in general. That's usually how that works. Some of these slaves did not want to just stay in a state like Ohio because they figure, okay, there are still laws on the books that are against me being here. How about I go all the way north into Canada? And that's how you have a lot of Canadians who are black that have African American slave ancestry. Moving right along from that, this commercial is on point. This is how it happened a lot of times. Think about it. If you have runaway slaves, let's say you got an 18, 19-year-old girl, and then she's in the house with a white family, and they got an 18, 19, 20-year-old son, and then, they stay with him for about a year. They become close. They may have sex. A baby comes about. I mean, those things happen. This whole narrative about, if you have anybody light-skinned in your family, that's because it was a slave rape. It's not necessarily true. Yes, slave rape did happen, but it wasn't always the case. Sometimes you have people that got into relationships. You had white people that weren't even necessarily slave owners or anything like that, just regular everyday white folks that worked in the North and the South, they would come across a black person somehow and develop a bond. That did happen. It's the truth. It's the reality. I know the popular thing is to have the victimhood narrative come in and say, oh, the only reason why a white person would get with a black person during that time was because of rape, because of some kind of, assault, some kind of nefarious thing. That was not always the case. It's a reality of the situation. My great grandfather was mixed black and Irish. He was born like in the early 1900s. I mean, do you think that's because of, some kind of assault? I mean, he lived with both of his parents in the same house. That was happening in the 1850s, 1860s. It's the truth, but let's keep moving. People also want to talk about this white savior complex, saying, no, this commercial pushes the white savior thing. It should have been a black woman begging for freedom or a black woman and a black man running away to Canada, all this, that, and the third. But the truth is, laws like anti-miscegenation in the United States were overturned due to a white man and a black woman getting together. Loving versus Virginia, 1967. A white man and a black woman get together. They get sentenced to a year in jail because of that, because it was illegal in Virginia for a white man and a black woman to get married. Matter of fact, there were certain laws in Virginia and Maryland specifically that were against a white person having sex with any kind of colored person that was a slave. It didn't matter if the person was black, mulatto, East Indian, Native American, or whatever. If they were an indentured servant or a slave, that whole thing was illegal. You couldn't have sex and you couldn't be married. Those laws persisted into the 20th century and it had to get overturned with Loving versus Virginia. Now, it wasn't the same law about sex and all that. It was more about marriage. They called it anti-miscegenation. All right. So this whole thing about the white savior being the problem, I mean, it wasn't a problem to get the laws overturned. That's what we base our current system of not having anti-miscegenation on, was that particular case, a white man and a black woman. So all the outrage here is kind of ridiculous. I mean, where was the outrage when they had that movie about this whole situation, Loving versus Virginia? Where was the outrage then? I think it's popular to be outraged online because what else are you really going to do? I mean, you can't really be, you got to have something to be mad at on the internets. That's just really what it is. Now, Ancestry did pull the commercial and they shouldn't have, in my opinion. But, a lot of these companies, they don't really want the heat on their back, because they're going to get all kind of crazy op-eds written about them, all kind of crazy media attention. They want to stay low profile and just make their money. And I can't get mad at that. What I think is ridiculous is the reaction from the everyday person who was upset. I mean, come on. This commercial that you saw earlier was real. That actually happened. It's a situation that's the truth. And I think that more things like that need to be shown rather than this whole narrative of, oh, if you have anybody that's light-skinned or mixed, it's because a slave was raped in the 1700s. That's not always the case. Sometimes whites and blacks happen to get together and get into a relationship and they fall in love. And sometimes the white person back then was not a slave owner. I mean, it was only like 1 or 2% of whites that even owned slaves back then. So sometimes it was a regular normie gets with a black person and then babies come about, families are created. They might be one of your great grandmamas or grandfathers. And that is the truth. So what do you think? Do you think that this ad was too far? It went over the edge. It didn't tell anything about the reality of the situation. Would you want more of a victimhood type of commercial to come out? Would that be more appropriate? Would that make you feel better to have somebody crying and bloody and beat up? Is that what we want? Do we want Roots, the fantasy novel? Do we want that? I don't really know. I think that more reality should be put out there. And that's one thing about removing monuments and whatnot of Confederate generals. A lot of history is being shielded. People don't really know what's going on. They're being told certain things that seems like it makes sense, even though it may not make sense. So whatever your comments are, please let me know in the comments below. And that's all I got to say for this video. If you like what you heard, please comment, rate, share, and subscribe. Peace.